In this video, I'll look at adding more artificial lights in my city, now that I've got the overall tone and shading going from the sunset. What I'll start out with then is a quick look at the lights in the bus stop, picking one and pressing Z to zoom extents. Notice that the lights draw on the screen at a consistent size always. These are light icons that show which way the light is facing, and they're always the same size regardless of how much you zoom in, which makes it convenient to select them. Alternately for lighting, sometimes what I'll do is change my selection filter, dropping down where it says All and choosing Lights. This way I can only pick light objects. Right now this light is part of a group, Tram Stop 1. What we're going to do is use a mix of standard and photometric lights to get the light in our city looking correctly. First, I'll look at the photometric light in this tram stop and see what it's doing. I'll choose Group and Open, select the light, and look at the modifier panel. What this light says is it is a free rectangle. What it actually means is that this light is a uniform diffuse distribution. Instead of coming out in all directions, it is aiming from the rectangle down, as shown by the sphere. It's uniform, meaning it is not governed by a photometric web describing a particular spread of light from the bulb. Most light bulbs are dimmer at the base, because that's where you have to screw it in, for example, and brighter where they're round, producing an uneven light from that bulb versus uniform. This light has ray trace shadows, so those shadows project through the geometry and cast neat shapes out on the sidewalk. It's set to be a fluorescent light that's white, and this gives me a nice color, although not too warm or too cool. Finally, it's a 500 candle power light, which is fairly bright, although I've bumped it up a little bit just so I could see what I was doing. We may end up playing with this a bit. It looks like this light is usable in some places. However, I'm not sure this is the right shape always for the other lighting I'd like to put in. So I'll keep it in mind that this photometric light can be made to look like a true bulb, but I'll see what else is available. I'll choose Group and Close to close up that tram group. What I'll start with then are lights underneath the overhangs in my buildings. We can see here that most of the buildings have a glass front, columns out front, and some kind of overhang, just barely visible under here. I'll press F4 to turn on edged faces so I can see my geometry a little more clearly. What I'd like to start with, even though I may not see the fixtures, is some kind of light coming from this canopy over the sidewalk, giving me pools of light outside the building and washing the walls and the columns. I'll press T for top view, Z to zoom extents, and F3 for wireframe, and then zoom in on my first building. I'll choose Create, and I'm going to try a photometric light, dropping down under Lights and choosing Photometric and Free Light. Again, as we saw with the sun, a light is either free or a target, and they behave the same with the exception that a target light can be clicked and dragged and moved to aim at a particular object. I'll click once to place my light and right-click to stop creating. Then I'll go to the modifier panel. If you don't right-click, you keep creating lights, and you can get a lot of lights really quick. Now I'll configure this light. It's right now a uniform spherical, meaning this light will emit in all directions. I'm going to change the distribution type here to a spotlight. This will be a can light that's mounted in the canopy. I'll pull it over into place, maybe just centered on the doors, or over one door with another one to match. I'll press F for front view and Z to zoom extents, and pull this light up on the Y-axis just under the geometry. And that's an important point here. If you submerge the light in the geometry, you'll get all kinds of lighting issues, so make sure your lights are just below. You'll avoid a lot of problems and strange artifacts. Now with the spot, I need to consider the spread. When I look at this light, for example, in a shaded view, what I'll see here is this gives me a nice circle of light, stronger in the center and falling off. This is a result over here in the distribution of the spotlight from the hot spot and fall off, 30 and 60 degrees respectively. What I'll typically do for recessed lighting like this is widen out the fall off, let's say to 80, and that light softens off really nicely, giving me a good pool of light that I can use as an accent, but not a hard edge to it. If you'd like to soften it even more, crank up that fall off, or lower down the hot spot. Here's 25 and 90, and it's a good pool of light. The next question on lighting is, do you need shadows? Now in the real world, all lights cast shadows. But here, it's not really shadowing off anything particular, and I can see by the blue cone here it's not intersecting much, so I may be able to get away with no shadows. I'll go into top view, press F3 so I can see what I'm doing, hold Shift, and clone this light over to the next door. I'm going to say that these lights are paired over the doors and they're instanced. That way if I change one, they all change. I'll hold Control and pick the other one, and Shift clone them across. Right here, in front of the next one. Now it also looks like I'm in the wrong place, so I'm going to make sure I take these and pull them back. I'm actually under the balcony and I need to be under here. I'll grab all four lights, pull them in, and see if I need to just space them out a little bit. Moving a light over, grabbing both, and centering on the doors. That should work nicely. Again, I'll grab it, pull it over, take both, and center. One more check, it looks like I'm under the geometry, and into a perspective I go by pressing P. I'll zoom out, view this area of my scene, and press render to see how it looks and how my intensity is. One thing with lighting is to make sure you test constantly. Test it, and then test it again. You'd be surprised how many tests you need before you really start to see the look you want. We're running cheap because we've turned off Final Gather, and I can really see how my lights are pooling around the entry, washing the columns here, and lighting up some of the wall without revealing too much inside. I'll take this light and clone it to the other buildings, and this will be a great start for my artificial lights, lighting up the areas where people need to go in, the main entries here, while leaving most of the rest of it in the dark. One last tweak. I'd like these to be two separate volumes. So I'll take these lights and just pull their fall-offs down, maybe 75. I'll try one more render, but this time instead of View, I'll drop down and pick Region, and pull this region just over to the first door and hit Render. This way I've got a quicker render, and that's an important lesson to learn. You can spend a lot of time test rendering. So make sure you set up a region and render only what you need. Once we're throwing in reflections, refractions, anti-aliasing, interpolation, all kinds of things, we really start to see a hit in render time. So we need to economize in our testing. I'll clone these lights down and then start in on the streetlights.